All right, you guys. So we're going to look at Jamestown. Our essential question for the day is how would you compare and contrast the first British colonial settlements of Jamestown, the Massachusetts Bay Colony? And you're going to figure out they have two very different experiences. All right, and so make sure you'll see when we look at Jamestown today, and then we'll look at Massachusetts Bay Colony tomorrow. All right, so here's a little joke for you. I'll let you read that. All right. So I have to get up so the lights won't go off. All right, so all right, so you can see by the punchline, I'd rather be in hell 2 minutes than Virginia 30 days. That shows you the first 5, 6 years of Jamestown's existence, it was rough. All right, I mean, the colony came this close to not making it. All right, so there is a diagram or sort of a picture of Jamestown, what it looks like, and the three ships that delivered the people there, the Godspeed, the Discovery, and the Susan Constant. And so they're going to pick and choose this area on the James River because it has a little elbow, and I'll show you right there in a second why that's significant. All right, so what were the earlier attempts? We know it was Roanoke, and Roanoke, I told you that story yesterday, did not succeed. Jamestown's going to differ from earlier settlements because this is significant for us. You got to know this. All right, it's the first permanent English settlement in North America. All right, so period. All right, so who sponsored this enterprise? The Virginia Company. And you probably know the Virginia Company is a joint stock company, right? And so the joint stock company was very popular at the time. And what that does is instead of one person, because colonization and exploration was risky business, instead of one person investing in that, they dispersed the risk. And so that way, if the thing failed or went south, then you would lose all your money. So you could disperse your investment risk. All right. So why was Jamestown founded? It was founded as a commercial venture. Know that. All right. It was not founded for religious purposes. It was founded to make money. All right. So what type of geographic spot was it built on? Well, if you look at it, back here is where marsh was. Here was the elbow of the river. And so there's reasons why they did that. All right. So the advantage is defense. All right. Really, Jamestown was on an island, a river island, so more or less. And so the idea is the island with the marsh in the background and the ocean in the front of them, they felt like that would be easy to defend. And the water, because there was a bend in the river, they felt that they would be able to unload and load ships a lot easier, and they had to have access to the Atlantic. The disadvantages are the fact that the island, well, it was crappy land. It wasn't really good land. There wasn't enough good land to grow a lot of crops. And then, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes, get it? What do mosquitoes cause? Malaria, all right, and then cholera. You know what cholera is, all right? Because the island did not drain well, people would poop, and then later on that water would drain, people would drink that water. And so it was not a great place. So what were the goals of the Virginia Company? There were two, all right? One was to find the Northwest Passage, but they were going to be unsuccessful because it doesn't exist, but they thought it did, that passage that would shorten the trade route from Europe to Asia. And secondly was gold. They still, they were hoping they'd find gold. And literally they loaded up, the first settlers loaded up a ship of mica, full of mica, and they thought they were going to hit it rich. And of course they sent the ship to England, and of course they're going, yeah, thanks for the dirt, this is worthless. And so they didn't know. All right, that tells you something about the first settlers. The initial problems and obstacles of first settlers is there were gentlemen and ne'er-do-wells. In other words, gentlemen of upper class and ne'er-do-wells who were lower class who weren't used to doing any work. And so gold, they basically were looking for gold. They couldn't find gold. They drank and they gambled. They didn't grow much crops for food. Instead, they turned around and relied upon the local Native Americans, the Powhatans. All right, was their leadership? None until John Smith. And so the result is the first few months, those colonists, many died because of starvation, disease, malnutrition. So it was a poorly run enterprise. All right, the Powhatan Confederacy were the local Native Americans. And it wasn't, we call it the Powhatan Confederacy because it was several tribes, like 7 or 8 tribes, and the Powhatans were the most powerful. Whoops. Sorry, I actually cut that off. And the Powhatans were the most successful, all right, and they were the biggest. And so they were the strongest, and that's why they called it the Powhatan Confederacy. The colonists relied upon them. I mean, in fact, really, for the Powhatans, it's not for them. The colonists probably don't make it. And so they relied upon them for food, for trade, survival. But the problem was the colonists landed at Jamestown right during the middle of a really bad sustained drought. And so the Powhatans, the Native Americans themselves, were low on resources, so they could only spare so much excess food. And so, however, that's going to be a problem. All right, and so relations with the Powhatan Confederacy will fluctuate the first few years. When John Smith takes over and says to his fellow colonists, "He who shall not work shall not eat," then the colonists start to produce things and also befriends Pocahontas. And so relations were good. Well, then he gets wounded in a fire and he has to leave, and relations become bad again. And then relations become good when John Rolfe marries Pocahontas. Bad when she dies. And this affects the colonists because they're reliant upon the Powhatans for basically survival to a large extent. And so, but keep in mind, from 1607 to 1608, the Virginia Company, they're dropping settlers there, right? They're leaving them there. They're like, all right, come on, you can do it. And then the settlers just keep dropping like flies. The worst of it was the starving time. And the starving time, over that period of time, the winter of 1609, 1610, 400 colonists starved, and only 60 were left the next spring. And so they've also now determined there were several cases of cannibalism, and I'll let you see the next slide. So I'm going to read this to you because it's kind of that old funky English. And this is by George Percy, and he was one of the first governors of Jamestown. Now all of us at Jamestown beginning to feel the sharp prick of hunger, which no man truly describes, but he with hath tasted the bitterness thereof. A world of miseries ensued, as the sequel will express unto you, and so much that some to satisfy their hunger would have robbed the store for which I caused them to be executed. And so they would store stuff, and where they kind of like a community storage for food, and if you robbed that, then they would execute you, which he did. Then, having fed upon our horses and other beasts as long as they lasted, we were glad to make shift with vermin as dogs, cats, rats, and mice. All was fish that came to net to satisfy the cruel hunger, as to eat boots, shoes, or any other leather some could come by. And those being spent and devoured, some were forced to search the woods, to feed upon serpents and snakes, and dig the earth for wild and unknown roots, where many of our men were cut off and slain by savages. And so Native Americans would attack them when they're out looking for food. And now, famine beginning to look ghastly and pale in every face, that nothing was spared to maintain life, and to do those things which seem incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of the graves and to eat them. All right, and so this is what these guys were eating. I mean, they're eating snakes, they're eating gross roots, and yes, they're eating leather, because leather does have some sort of caloric value. And so after a while, now there is no indications of murder, so this is kind of an over dramatization, but there is proof for sure now that bodies were exhumed and dug up and eaten. This was true. One dude killed his pregnant wife and ate parts of her. Luckily, he didn't touch the baby, but he did eat parts of her. The bad thing about this is all this is going on, and people are practicing cannibalism, and the colony's on the ropes, and things are going really poorly. Keep in mind, the Virginia Company, they don't want this news to get out, because that would make them look really bad. And so, that you have to consider that. They're trying to save this colony because there's a lot of money invested in that. And so you have all this stuff going on, it doesn't look good. All right. And so you see, you got people like that. Tasty. Yeah. All right. So this is the evidence, and they just found this. Just an interesting side story. They found this skeleton about 15 years ago. One of the excavations at Jamestown was a 14-year-old girl who died, they think, within 3 or 4 weeks of coming to Jamestown. And so they exhumed her skeleton. They figured out through new scientific techniques what she probably looked like, and they know by looking at these things marked right here, those are saw marks in which she was probably cannibalized. So What did the colonists do when spring arrived? Those 60 colonists, they're like, bump this, let's get out of here. So they got on a ship, headed down the Chesapeake Bay to get out of England. But just when they were about to hit the open ocean, the incoming ships from the Virginia come led by a new governor, Lord De La Warr, and he says, turn around, we're going back, we're going to make this thing happen. And so what does make it happen, Jamestown was on the ropes. Almost doesn't make it, but what does turn it around is tobacco. All right, tobacco is that brown gold, what they call, that's the quotations of it, brown gold, because it's going to become a really important integral cash crop. High strain of tobacco developed by John Rolfe, which is going to help Jamestown to thrive and prosper. It's going to give them an economic reason. All right, so it establishes a commodity. It was in demand. Commodity is something you buy and sell. Beginning of cash crops. And so it gives them an economic reason for being, right? The negatives for this is it exhausts the soil, which you'll see, and then it's labor intensive, and so which you also see, you need a lot of labor and slaves to do that, and so you'll see the problems with these. Obviously, slaves will be a problem, but also they'll need more land, and they're going to run into the face of Native Americans. All right, so 1619, two very distinctive things happen in Jamestown history. First was this: the House of Burgesses. Okay, so listen carefully when I say this. The House of Burgesses is significant because it is the very first representative assembly in American history. So that means those people in Jamestown elected representatives to sit in that building and make laws on their behalf. This is important because it's one of the first steps toward democracy. The bad thing that happens is the first group of slaves brought to Jamestown, about 20 African slaves were brought to Jamestown, the very first to the New World. Now, those slaves, granted, those initial slaves that were brought were able to become indentured servants, and they're not going to be changed over like what you'll see with the Barbados slave codes and they make slavery permanent. But it does show you that the cash crops is going to create that demand. Okay, the road to royal colony. And so because of that demand for more and more land, you're going to see Native Americans get more and more PO'd. And so this long protracted warfare between the Powhatans and the Jamestown colonists, or it's going to basically bankrupt the Virginia Company because they can't sustain it. They can't continue to pay for this. And so in 1624, the king makes Virginia a royal colony, and basically the crown takes over. So was there eventual success? Yes. So look, by 1700, Jamestown, so almost 100 years later, Jamestown becomes more of this. It becomes what we know as the Chesapeake Bay region. So you got Jamestown right there, but then you see these other towns: Williamsburg, Henrico, Petersburg, Hampton, Norfolk, and all these. And so you're starting to see it spread, and it's because of tobacco. All right. So now you have your information, and so tonight watch this and then write your postcard. All right.